Retro.
Hi, this is Fred Tatasciore, and you're listening to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. The Force is strong with both of them.
Hello there, and welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And it's Monday, and that means we're going to be talking some Clone Wars. But before we get into that, Jay, you want to remind everybody where we can be found online?
All right. Well, we are very easily found on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust.
Okay. The dish is aligned. The signal's boosted to maximum output. The shield is down, and we are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So we are going to be resuming our discussion of the Clone Wars and more specifically the Mortis Arc, which is 3 episodes. And we talked about the first one of those last week. And we decided that we're going to cover the second and third episodes back to back this week, simply because we didn't want to leave that last episode hanging for 6 weeks because we're going to be covering them all. And so we wanted to wrap this up because it's an important arc. And last week we talked about how this arc really is legendary among Star Wars fans. So super important. I'm going to stop babbling now and ask Jay if you would go ahead and give us the summary, which it's a long one, but this is complex. So I didn't really know how to make it too much shorter.
Well, you always do such a good job, and I love reading them. So here we go. As Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka attempt to leave Mortis, the Son arrives and abducts Ahsoka to force Anakin to return. In their pursuit of the Son, Obi-Wan and Anakin crash land on Mortis. While Anakin attempts to rescue Ahsoka, Obi-Wan seeks out the Father. The Son, in the guise of a prisoner, poisons Ahsoka with what appears to be the dark side. Next, the Son attacks the Father at the monastery. Fearing that the Father is dying, the daughter reveals the Dagger of Mortis to Obi-Wan, which can be used to kill these Mortis gods. Any plan to use the dagger against the Son is thwarted by the combined efforts of the possessed Ahsoka and the Son. After that, the Son deems Ahsoka as having no further use and snuffs her out with a simple touch to the head. Just when the Son is going to dispatch the Father, the daughter intervenes and is dealt a mortal blow instead. Her final act is to restore Ahsoka before she dies.
Yeah. So all these episodes in this arc are very consequential, and we got a lot to talk about here. We're going to try and contain it to 30 minutes, but we'll probably go over a little bit. What are your overall thoughts on this episode, Jay?
Well, there's just so much going on. And, as we talked about before, there's a lot of questions that are not resolved as even at the end of the entire 3-episode arc. And I think that is definitely intentional in a lot of ways. But there are some things that happen in here that I feel like are very closely and directly tied into things that we see in other areas of Star Wars. And obviously we'll be getting into those a lot more, but there's some direct connections, I think, to Padme in here. There's some connections, I think, to some of the future things that happen in other areas of Star Wars. And so it's got a lot of layering going on in a lot of these things. And so as we sort through this episode, I think as we talk about it, we'll have more questions than answers, and also hopefully be able to answer some of our questions.
Yeah. One of the things that Dave Filoni pointed out in the featurette that's on StarWars.com is that this dagger of Mortis is a metaphorical device. And then he goes on to say everything is symbolic in these episodes of what happens in all 6 Star Wars films. There's only 6 at the time when this came out. We didn't have The Force Awakens and the sequel trilogy. And anyway, so you got to keep that in mind here. One of the things I really enjoyed is that the trivia guide for this episode pointed out that the Sun's Tower is an homage to the Tower of Orthanc from Lord of the Rings, and that The tower itself resembles Saruman's staff from the films. So if you're familiar with that, and I thought it looked familiar, but I couldn't place it until I saw that in the featurette. But let's, I don't want to go beat by beat. We might as we go through this discussion, but I got a lot of questions here in the notes. And this episode starts off with them being Anakin, Ahsoka, and Obi-Wan in their shuttle, and they're trying to leave Mortis, and Anakin is dozing on a cot in the behind the cockpit, and he has a dream where he sees a mirror image of himself, but we kind of find out it's the sun, and he's tempting him to join him and kind of fall to the dark side. And he says that together they'll destroy the Sith and the Jedi, and they'll bring peace to everywhere they go. But Anakin refuses to join him in this quest. So, what do you think of this attempt by the Son to recruit Anakin and his idea that they'll destroy both the Sith and the Jedi?
Well, there's actually quite a bit to unpack here. And first of all, backing up to the introduction to this as we go through after the fortune cookie and they set us up for the episode. In the intro, they talk about how the sun is drifting ever closer to the dark. Whereas in the last episode, the first episode in this trilogy, we had talked about how we thought the sun is the dark, perhaps.
Right.
Embodied.
Aligned with the dark. Yeah.
Right. And so drifting closer to the dark, I thought was a weird way to put that. But that aside, one of the things that I picked up on was in Anakin's vision when the Son is talking to Anakin and he tells Anakin that he is the chosen one. Anakin kind of smiles. He gets this little like grin on his face. And then when the Son is trying to get him to join him, Anakin says, "I will never join the dark side willingly."
Right.
Which I thought was a very interesting quote on his point. And then as you pointed out, when the Son says, "We will destroy the Sith and the Jedi," did you notice how his voice sounded very much like Palpatine's at that point? It had that undertone to it.
I'd have to go back and listen to it. I mean, whether his voice sounded like, he sounded like Palpatine in the way he was talking is the way was my observation there. But I hadn't actually noticed if his voice changed any there. But I do know that Sam Witwer has done Palpatine successfully in the past as well. So
yes,
he is very capable of that.
Yeah, if you go back and listen to it again, he sounds, I should say, more like Sidious, not Palpatine so much. But yeah, so what I think is a big takeaway from this is that the Son is, I don't want to necessarily say desperate to get Anakin to stay, but I feel as though he's sensing that he can't pull this off without him.
Right. So, and it's going to be hard just to talk about this episode since we've already watched the one that comes after it, and we're getting ready to talk about it in another conversation here. My takeaway on this is that the daughter is not necessarily the light side incarnate. The Son's not necessarily the dark side incarnate. They align with those philosophies of light and dark, each respectively. But one of the things that the Son will go on to say is that, there is no light without dark, or vice versa, in this case, because at one point he tells Anakin, it's like, you put it so simply that, you can't just fall to the dark side. There's you have to have both in this regard. And as much as the Son might already be aligned with the dark side, he hasn't completely fallen to it. He hasn't fallen into these Sith ideals, but now he's starting to promote them here, right? This Sith have gone out of their way. This is the thing that Palpatine tempts Anakin with, which is, and it's based out of other conversations we've been seeing in Attack of the Clones, where Anakin's talking about, like, all the people need to get together and decide what's best for all the people and then do it. And then Padme challenges him, like, who's going to make them? And he says, well, someone's strong, someone's wise, and so he's got these ideas. And then Palpatine tempts him and even to the Sith with this very thing. It's that, use my knowledge. You can use it to save Padme, but it is also this, finally we're going to have peace. You get rid of the Jedi. We can put it into this endless war. And what he leaves out is we're going to subjugate the galaxy. That's why we're going to have peace, and everyone's going to do what we say because we're so powerful, not because we're just going to get rid of all the bad guys. And we're going to substitute ourselves, and there will be peace. Is what they really mean, but they're not. They're trying not to make themselves out to be the bad guys in all of this.
Right.
And so Anakin, I think, sees through this right now, which is this notion is crazy that you're just going to go out, destroy the Sith and the Jedi, and then we're going to have peace. He does not yet see the flaw that with the Jedi, that they lost this war the moment they picked up their lightsabers and started fighting on behalf of the Republic here. We could talk about this for a while, but I want to jump to the next part. So the son's kidnapped Ahsoka, has her in his tower. And then while she's all chained up, there's this little creature that they never bothered to name. It does not have a name, who is talking to her and is befriending her, basically telling her there's no escape, whatever. And she's like, I'm a Jedi, I'm going to get away. But then it bites her on the arm. And then we see all of the veins turn black. And the episode guide pretty much tells us that she's been infected with the dark side of the Force here. So you don't have to use your imagination, I guess, to come up with an experience here. But what is your take? What exactly did the son do to her? Because at the end of this, he says, now you're mine.
Yeah. So when he appears to Ahsoka as this other little being, and he's being very almost philosophical with her and asking her questions about things and almost speaking to her, I don't want to necessarily say in riddles, but there's one point where he talks about the chains that are binding her. And he says, the chains are the easy part. What goes on in here, and points to his head, that is the more difficult. So that right away, of course, we've got Darth Bane on the brain because we've been doing the Darth Bane book club. But of course, I think of the Sith Code, through victory, my chains are broken.
Right.
And so my mind kind of goes to that. So when I think he's kind of appearing to Ahsoka in this way to get her to lay her guard down so that he can approach her. Because if he showed up to her as the son or the gargoyle that he was, she's going to be thrashing. She's going to be doing everything that she can in her power to avoid even coming in contact with him as much as possible, being chained up. But this little kind of gnomey sort of being that is approaching her and then just grabs her and bites her. It's almost like a vampire, in, like you said, injecting the dark side, this venom into her. And I think that it's a very, as you talked about, like the metaphysical kind of thing. And it's something that maybe is almost like Night Sister magic, which is another little reference later on here too, when we talk about him, boop, Ahsoka, and then she just goes down. But I think that that's part of that. So I think that he was truly physically infecting her in only the way that he could do on Mortis.
So do you think he corrupted her, or did he possess her?
Maybe a little bit of both. I think it was more possessed than corrupted, because corrupted means to change the fundamental of someone, whereas I think infected means to overtake and shadow what could become restored. Does that make sense?
I get your definitions. I'm not sure that I would use them the same way, because here's what I was trying to figure out is that when he bit her and, clearly she's been we're just going to use this term poisoned. I think we can agree on that one here.
Sure.
Was she was she corrupted so that she's now fallen to the dark side, and what she was doing in this corrupted state was of her own will? Or was she possessed and basically being controlled by the sun in those moments? And what makes it a difficult choice for me is that when Anakin shows up, she says things like, "Master, are you proud of me?" And, that little critter had told her, like, what I found interesting is that, the son and that other guy's is that little gnome thing that you were talking about. He said, your only way to survive is to leave him, basically saying the same thing that vision of her older self had said. But, she says a lot of things which I can't decide if it was this corrupted version of Ahsoka having had the ego showing up and basically giving voice to thoughts that she'd buried down, or if it was the son taking advantage of someone that he possessed and using words that he knew would hurt Anakin against him.
Yeah, that's a
And
good point, because there's some things that she says that probably only Anakin would know. You know what I mean?
Right.
And only she would know.
Yeah. And I mean, if he's possessed her, then does he have access to those thoughts? Does he have access to the subconscious and stuff like that? I'm leaning towards more of a possession type of a thing, because when she gets snapped out of all of this later in the episode, when she's essentially brought back to life, she has no idea what happened. Where am I? What happened? Those type of things. And she doesn't ever really give any voice to any of these things ever again in this situation. That any doubts that Anakin would be proud of her or whatever. Her only doubts are in the future, is like we've seen Ahsoka, is that, was he a good master? Am I infected with the dark side the way that he was? That's overstating it, but you get what I'm saying.
Yes.
It wasn't so much that she harbored doubts about what Anakin thought about her and the like.
Yeah. And the way that she said, I hate it when you call me that, when he called her Snips.
Yeah.
That was one of those things that was their terms of endearment for each other, with Snips and Sky Guy. So did she truly not like that nickname, or was it just being manipulated in that way?
Right. Well, I feel like it was a manipulation there. He was picking up on all the things that may have been sore spots early, but have become part of the relationship later in that regard. So,
and what's crazy too is you think about this in terms of the last episode as well, because when he did appear to Anakin as Shmi, he did say things to Anakin that only Shmi would have, like Anakin would have known that, could have been Shmi. Like, those weren't made up. Those were actually things that she would have said or would have known. So, yeah.
Well, and then later in the episode, when everyone's in the same place, son, father, and daughter, and Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka, and there's this whole fight that goes on, and then the son ends up with a dagger. He basically says everything is gone as he has foreseen, which is foreshadowing what Palpatine will say in Return of the Jedi there. So I think, he's going to show Anakin the future in a bit. So in the next episode, so, not to get ahead of ourselves there. So he clearly has an ability to, time, it doesn't work for these guys as it does for mortals, Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka in this case.
Sure.
He can see the past, he can see the future, and then he has a way of seeing what's inside people in this regard. So yeah, fascinating guy. But let's move along. The daughter chooses to show Obi-Wan the dagger of Mortis after the son attacks the father, and the father is believed to be expiring faster than even before. Why do you think she did that?
Well, the dagger of Mortis is obviously, as Dave Filoni pointed out, it's this representation of what the Force is on Mortis. And so I think that what that was representing was the physical ability for Obi-Wan to have literally a weapon against what was happening, and to give him an edge to help, tilt things to their side, so to speak. Because I think that she felt that she was a little helpless herself, because she was in the position that she is in as the daughter, and that maybe she couldn't actually wield that. Maybe there was something about it that prevented her from being able to utilize it in the way that it needed to be used. And maybe Obi-Wan was her way of almost using him as the tool to wield the weapon.
Yeah, I mean, they wrote it off that she couldn't, she says something about how she can't go to that platform to get this dagger or whatever. And so, that's the literary device that kept her from getting it. But I keep going back to this thing from the featurette where Dave Filoni was talking about everything that happens in these episodes is metaphorical. It's symbolic of things that happened in the 6 movies. And I can't help but wonder if it's this, which is, and bear with me as I try and get this all out. I'm not sure exactly how to say it. The Jedi we know, as I said a moment ago, they lost when they got baited into participating in the Clone Wars, when they took up their lightsabers on behalf of the Republic to fight off the Separatists here. And so they basically made themselves susceptible to the dark side. And their whole one of their big motives was they were going to wipe out the Sith here and basically wipe out the dark side. And so how is this symbolic of that? Well, the daughter sees that the son is risking throwing the force out of balance with the attack on the father. And so her answer to that is not necessarily to stand up to her brother herself, although she will fight him over the course of this episode a little bit, but it is to give Obi-Wan a weapon to destroy him. So it's to the idea I think is that she's representative of the Jedi and their ideals where they're going to destroy the Sith. They're going to destroy the dark side, which is as much of a problem with balance as anything. Right. And so, and Obi-Wan takes up that sword, which was the same mistake that the Jedi made.
Oh, that's so true. Yeah.
In the Clone Wars there. And by doing so, he gave the dark side what they needed to be victorious in this moment.
Oh gosh, I hadn't even looked at it that way. That's a great interpretation.
Thank you.
Of course.
Just occurred to me as I was having this conversation. That's the great thing about these conversations, Jay, is that the more we talk it out, the better I understand this stuff. So,
for sure.
That's the fun parts of doing this podcast. So, okay. So we know what happens next. They all end up in that place. The Ahsoka hands over the dagger of Mortis to the son, and he's preparing to use it against the father, which we need to remember this when we talk about the next episode, and in our next episode. But the son goes to kill the father, but then the daughter gets in the way, and he ends up stabbing her in the back. And this is right after the son has basically said, well, I've got what I needed, so you're no longer useful, and basically snuffed Ahsoka out with a touch to the head. And I know you want to talk about that, but we can do that in just a second. But but then as a result, the son takes off. He panics. This is not what he intended. This is not what he wanted. And so I have two questions. One, why is the son so anguished by her death? And two, why does the father believe that the daughter's death is so catastrophic for the galaxy? He goes on to say the Sith are going to be strengthened and that they've got to leave, they being Anakin and Obi-Wan, because Ahsoka's still dead at this point, before the son could take their ship. What are your thoughts on those two things?
Well, I think that it upset him so much because she truly is the opposite side of the same coin for him. In that, we've talked a lot about the idea of a dyad, Rey and Kylo Ren being a dyad. I think this is the true type of original dyad that we're looking at right here, in that obviously one cannot exist without the other. So when light is snuffed out, even though darkness wants to rise up against it, it still needs the light to exist. And so I think, that's a big part of that.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think you're on to it right there, which is that the Sith wanted to get rid of the Jedi. It's not that they necessarily want to get rid of the light side of the Force. They consider just relying on the light side of the Force to be weak, but the son's already told you that there is no darkness without light in this episode, and so it's not what he wanted at all. They are siblings, they are close, and there'll be another comment on this in the next episode, which we'll get to in a second there. But so that's one part of it there. But then, the part that I'm struggling with a little bit more is the statement by the father that the death, and I paraphrase this, that the death is catastrophic for the galaxy. The Sith will be strengthened. I guess if we're looking at these episodes and things that happen to them as metaphors and symbolic of what goes on in the movies, is that, well, I just equated the daughter to the Jedi, right? And if the son is similar to the Sith, well, with her dead, that's the same thing as the Jedi dying out, and that leaves the Sith unchecked.
Mhm.
And if they, like the son, if the father, like the son, could see into the future, then he knows what that means. But all right, that's my interpretation. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good one, and that's what goes back to what I was just saying about how you still need both sides of the Force for, any kind of balance to be struck. Even though the dark, the Sith, whatever you want to call it, wants to run amok and unchecked, they still need, I mean, what are they fighting against if there is no light?
Right.
So you still have to have one with the other, as much as they may not want to admit it. But I do think one of the things that, as the daughter is dying, she says it's not his fault. She says, about the son, and you do hear some undertones of Duel of the Fates in there as she's talking about that too. And so she's giving a reason for why the son is doing what he's doing, that it's just his nature, and this is how he is. But there could still be some not good in him necessarily, which is what the father says, interestingly enough.
Right.
But she still believes that there is a purpose for her brother to be there. It's not his fault. This is his nature.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the other way we could look at it is that there can be more than one metaphors and more than one set of symbolism here, where the son here is looking for power, and if we're going to take him at his word, he's interested in bringing peace to the galaxy. And the way they're going to do that is by destroying the Jedi and the Sith. But what if in this moment that the daughter is not necessarily a symbol of the Jedi? Well, not just a symbol of the Jedi. What if she's also the symbol of Padme?
Yes.
Because yeah, if the son, Anakin ends up destroying what he loves most in the galaxy in an attempt to save her, and that it completely goes awry. And in this situation, the son is looking to get off this planet, looking to exert some power, looking to bring peace to the galaxy, but he ends up destroying the daughter in the process of doing it. So he lost the thing, as he's going to say, he loved her more than anything in this. And so, yeah, I think there's something there.
Well, at the beginning, when I mentioned that there's some connections to Padme in here, this is the tip of the iceberg. I have a few others that, as we talk about Ahsoka's resurrection, that I definitely want to hit upon as well.
All right. Well, why don't we do that now? Because we're about to run out of time. So, yes, as the son flees, the daughter is dying, and Anakin and Obi-Wan are asking what they should do about her. If there's anything and Anakin in particular asking, "Oh, can you do anything to help her?" And so Anakin and the father kind of act as a conduit to use some ability from the daughter to resurrect Ahsoka. So, what do you think of the significance of that act, and what happened exactly there?
Well, first of all, I had to look to see when this was released, and remember Avatar?
Yeah.
Kind of similar kind of situation going on in there too. But for me, what I felt like this is the daughter is, of course, as we said, the embodiment of light in Mortis. And she actually, giving is the highest form of strength. So I think that the way that the daughter was willing to give her essence over to Ahsoka is basically the way that she is able to look victorious, or be victorious, I should say, because victory can look like preserving someone else. So even though she wasn't able to go on herself, in her own embodiment type of thing, she not only was selfless, but she sacrificed herself in order to be able to allow Ahsoka, who she saw as being a promise towards the future, and giving her that chance. And to me, that is so much like Padme. And I'm telling you what, Dennis, I had this like epiphany moment while I was thinking about this, because we've talked a bazillion times and there's so much debate in the fandom about Padme, quote unquote, giving up. She's lost the will to live. But did she? Because strength that looks like surrender sounds like emotional collapse and weakness, but unlike the daughter, Padme had no power to act in that final moment. She couldn't transfer life, but the daughter could. However, Padme did transfer life in the form of Luke and Leia.
Yeah, she gave life, created life in that moment. Yeah.
Exactly. So realistically, I mean, you could argue that Padme is really what the ideal of the light side looks like in the real world, like as a human. But yet the daughter is that in that metaphysical sense. Mic drop.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, I mean, it's like I said earlier, I'm glad we're talking through this because it's giving me a lot of ideas. It's just that, there's enough similarities that I think we can draw some of these conclusions, but at the same time, there's enough differences that makes me second guess everything we just said, particularly everything I just said in this discussion, because, these are beings that are so powerful. They have to keep them contained here, but yet, Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka are so important to all this. And well, I tell you what, let's go ahead and wrap this up because we're going to turn around and record the follow-up to the final episode of this arc here in just a minute. And we can further hash out some of these ideas as we get through there, especially since we'll have the conclusion to bring a little bit more volume to the discussion of all this. But so yeah, we're going to put a pin in everything. And with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up this discussion of Podcast Stardust and this discussion of the second episode of the Mortis Arc, which is called Altar of Mortis. We hope you'd enjoyed it, and we will hope you consider subscribing to the podcast if you haven't done so already, so you can continue to get our discussions of the Clone Wars. And then as we drift into Maul Shadow Lord for the next few weeks, we discuss that. We've got our Darth Bane book club that we're doing on a monthly basis, and of course our Force Awakens celebration over the course of the year. So lots coming up on Podcast Stardust, and we hope you will join us for all of it. And if you once you've done that and subscribe to us on your favorite podcatcher, we'd love your ratings and reviews. And I would direct you to retrozap.com if you want to get our entire back catalog of shows, along with all the other great shows that are on the network. Jay, you'll go ahead and remind everybody what our social media contacts are and where else you can be reached online.
Yes, we can be most conveniently found on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust. So please hit us up on one of those two social media outlets for any of your reactions and just to share out the show too, and share with some of your friends, because we'd love to have new listeners all the time. And if there's some things that you'd like to let us know about or that you'd like to react to, especially when it comes to things like these episodes of Mortis and so on and so forth, where you have some ideas, you can drop us a line at podcaststardust@gmail.com. And we also have our Pinterest boards, as well as other places to find us to download and listen to the episodes, such as YouTube and YouTube Music as well. And then if you are in need of some Podcast Stardust swag, you can hit up the link in our show notes that will take you over to our TeePublic store, where you can pick from one of 7 different show logo designs available on all kinds of fun products. And if you do happen to pick something up, please snap a picture and post it to social media and tag us, because we love to see where those are out in the wild.
Okay. You want to remind everybody what's going on with cosplay?
Yes, you can catch me as Ahsoka as seasons 3 through 5. So right here, as you're seeing in these episodes, over on my Instagram, which is at j.snipscosplay. And I have to say, watching this today, I'm thinking to myself, could I be an evil Mortis Ahsoka at some point?
That'd be fun.
I've seen other Ahsokas do it. It's really cool. So again, you can catch me at j.snipscosplay over there on Instagram.
Okay, upcoming on the show on Wednesday, we'll be getting into the finale of the Mortis Arc with a discussion of episode 17 from season 3 of the Clone Wars. And then on Friday, we are getting into Maul, Shadow Hunter. So as I've been telling you all the last episode or two, we are switching up our release schedule. While Maul is airing, we're going to be doing our coverage of that on Fridays, and then we will put the news on Monday. So, a bit fresher take on Maul before the next episode comes out the following Monday. So, at any rate, we hope you join us for that. And with that, thanks for listening to episode 1017 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great week. And until next time, may the Force be with you.